So yeah, this is kind of a more advanced color picker that has some like built-in color schemes and stuff like that. So you don't really need this, but I think it's useful to be able to kind of match colors and do different stuff. So you'll see one of the things we'll look at is using the sort of different values for color as well as the hex values. So you can see there's a hex value for each color, but then it shows you the RGB, red, green, blue values as well. So you can change the color by changing the amount of red, green, and blue. So yeah, that's a color wheel, but we'll be able to edit the colors in P5, of course. So yeah, I'm gonna go over to P5 and start a new sketch and talk about colors, and I'll start working on a little self-portrait. Okay, so with color, we have stroke and fill. And this is kind of like Adobe Illustrator. We looked at this a little bit last week, but basically each one of our shapes, except for lines and points, can have a stroke and a fill. So the fill is the middle of the color, and the stroke is the outside outline of the color, or color for the shape. So if I start making a self-portrait, let's say I want a face. Actually, something I forgot to cover in the last lesson is comments. I kind of talked about this a little bit, but in programming, we have this thing called comments. Comments are things that we write in the code that the computer ignores. They're things for other developers to read or for ourselves to read in the future. So if I want to make a comment in P5, I can just put two slashes, and then I can say this is a comment, and it doesn't change anything in the code. Whereas if I wrote this is a comment just anywhere, then I would get an error. You can't just like write random stuff. But if you put a couple slashes first, then you can write random stuff. And this is useful just to make some notes in various places. And a lot of time when you're working on a software project or writing code, you're working with other people. And so it's useful to kind of explain what's going on. Sometimes parts of your code might not make sense on their own. So if you're making a self-portrait, you might have a bunch of different shapes. You might have like some ellipses. And let's say, the first ellipse is your face and one is your eye and the other is your other eye. That you can't tell that just from seeing the word ellipse. You might be able to guess after you look at the outcome, but a way to kind of help along is just to say this is the face. So that'll make it easier for somebody else to understand what's happening in your code. So comments are really important. If you're like a developer and you're applying for a job and you send your GitHub profile to a hirer or whatever, they're gonna read your comments more than they're gonna read your code, because the comments really show what the code does, what you're thinking about, how you explain things to other people, and that's an important part of collaboration. You can also in P5 write what's called the multi-line comment. So that looks sort of like a comment, except you add two little asterisks in between the two slashes, and then you can write as much stuff as you want. So this is a multi-line comment, and basically I can skip, go to the next line, I can do all this stuff, and it'll stay inside of this comment. So normally at the beginning of a program, I'll always have a comment that kind of gives some context for the program, and you'll see this, like if we look at any of the P5 examples, if I go to File, Examples, and I just choose a random example, you can see at the very beginning, there's a big comment. So I don't know why it says objects. Oh, that's because so it's part of the objects examples. It has a quick example, a description of what this is, and then it says who it was written by, which is the original processing authors, Casey Rios and Ben Fry. So a comment will usually have some basic information like that. So I might say like, this is my self-portrait by Owen Roberts. I might put the date that I created it. I might include other information like a link to a reference or other things like that. So that's usually the first thing that you'll see at the top of any program before you see any actual code. And so as I'm drawing my self-portrait, I usually will use comments. So I'll say stuff like, this is going to be the face. And then I'll start to draw stuff. So when I go back later and want to find stuff, it's easier to find stuff. If somebody else is reading it, they can understand what it is. I actually noticed a lot of you guys used comments in your code for this week, which is great because I didn't really talk about it that much. But it was probably helpful. I think a lot of you guys who did the big Hula Park squares, grids of squares, started putting in comments like column 10 or row 5 or whatever. It's probably because it made it easier to find parts of your code.
One interesting thing that I found out, if you press control and the slash, it just it does it for you, don't like double slash.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you can hit command or control on Windows and the slash or question mark, and it'll just add them or take them out for you. So I do that a lot when I'm writing code. If I want to see what something looks like without a part, I just take it out, put it back in. So yeah, that's a good example. Okay, so let's draw a rectangle for my face. So I'm going to start it at X is 100, start it at Y is 100. I'm going to make it 100 pixels wide and 300 pixels tall. And I'm going to add some nice rounded corners. Let's make it a little bit less tall. Okay, so that'll be the beginning of my face. And so as I mentioned with our colors, we have this default fill is white. We have the default stroke is black. So if I say stroke and I say black, it's not going to change. And if I say fill and I say white, it's going to stay the same. Those are the defaults. So if you don't set a color, that's just what it's going to be. But if I want to set a color, I can change this to purple. And now I've got purple. So that's how we can add color through the stroke and the fill. And then with our stroke, if we want to change the stroke, I could change the stroke to white or blue, something like that. But it's very hard to see. So the other thing that's really important that goes along with stroke is the stroke weight. And so this is how thick the stroke is in pixels. So if I do stroke weight as 10, I get a nice thick outline. And I can go as high or low with that as I want. But I think 10 is good. Maybe 8 would look good. Okay. So because P5 is on the web, it can interface with CSS and JavaScript and HTML. It has built-in color names. So all of the names that you can use for HTML, you can use in P5. I think we looked at this last time, but so for example, if I want a slightly different purple, I could use lavender. I could just copy this lavender and go back to my fill and type it in there. I think that's right. It might need to be lowercase. I think it works if it's capitalized, but I think it confuses P5 and it doesn't show me this little color picker here. The color picker is relatively new. They brought that in a couple of years ago. It's obviously really useful, but they didn't always have it. Yeah. So the background color, actually that's a good point. So the background is kind of like fill, but it's just for the background. So you can put any color value here. Like I could put lavender here and now they would match. If I spelled that right, I didn't. But I can put whatever color I want for the background. Yeah, the background is sort of like fill, but it's its own thing. It's a good question. So yeah, I can use any of my HTML color names. And that's really useful if you're just trying to describe a color. It's also useful because I know what this means just by reading it. Whereas if I wrote a bunch of numbers, I might not immediately understand what it means, in which case, you would want to have a comment to say what color it actually is. But then you can see, with these color names, there's an equivalent hex code and an equivalent RGB. And you can actually use any of those in P5. So one thing that is a little bit different now is if I click on this little thing, it actually shows me all that stuff. And if I choose a random color like this, it does this weird thing. I don't think this is the best way to do it, but this is what it does. It gives me this RGB string, which is actually a CSS rule. But I can actually just write these numbers in, and this is going to be really useful in a couple weeks. Oh, I have to remember the numbers. Actually, let's just delete this stuff around it. So I can turn this from a string into a series of numbers. And so now it's going to look the same, although it doesn't. So I guess the number, their conversion is a little off, which is kind of funny, but that's fine. Anyway, now I can actually change this, like the amount of red, and just see what that looks like. And that'll become really useful in the future when we do interactive stuff, because I can take those numbers and I can change them using my mouse or different variables. We're not quite there yet, but yeah. Oh yeah, so if I start with lavender, that's just my HTML color. If I'm using a string, I don't exactly understand when this works and when it doesn't, but most of the time if I have a string, which is like a series of characters, P5 inserts this little color picker, and if I take that color picker, I can choose a different color, and then it'll give me the numbers for that color. If I want to just use those numbers and not this RGB thing, which is a CSS thing, I can delete the string part, which is these quotation marks, but then I also have to delete this little RGB part and this little extra parenthesis and just use these numbers. I guess I must have changed the color before I got out of here. So you don't have to use this now, but as I mentioned, in a few weeks when we start doing interactive stuff, that's when it's going to be really useful, because we can just use the numbers and we can tie that to different events rather than string names, although you can make the string names interactive as well. Just as a quick example, if I throw a mouse X in here, now when I move the mouse, it changes the color. And so we'll be able to create some animations and interactions that way. Another thing is you can do math here. Like I can say, well, I want this to be a little bit more red, but I don't know how much, so let's add 60. No, not that much. Let's add 40. So you can do math with those numbers as well, which you can't do with the string. So you can also do hex values, which are, just another way of representing a number value, basically. With the RGB picker, that kind of becomes pointless, because most of the time when you're using the hex value, it's because you're using a color picker somewhere else and you just want to copy and paste it over really quickly. But since it has the RGB built in, it's kind of pointless. At this point, I can just go here and I can use a hex number. I can find stuff here. So if you're using the editor, you may not really need that stuff. Okay. So the other functions that we're going to use is no stroke and no fill. And this is just going to take off the stroke, take off the fill. So for example, let's say I was adding some eyes. And so I'm going to add an ellipse like that. And let's copy that and put another one in. So I'll add 2 eyes. And let's say I want to be able to see through those eyes. I can say no fill. And so now there's no fill in the middle. I still get the stroke, so I still see the shape, but I see the shape behind it. So I can do no fill. If I want to get rid of the original stroke, I could move this down. So let's copy this and put it down here. And I could replace this with no stroke. So now I just have a block of color without the outline. So depending on what you're going for, obviously, this is going to be useful for different types of designs. One thing to be careful about, as we mentioned a little bit last week, is that once I apply like a fill or a stroke, it's going to keep applying to everything that comes after. So for example, once I set this no stroke up here, let's say I wanted to draw a line for my mouth. So I would do like a mouth. And then I'm going to draw a line from like 50x, 200y to 200x, 200y. I don't see anything, right? The reason I don't see anything is because I set no stroke here, but I haven't changed there to be a stroke again. And so I can't see the line because the line doesn't have a fill. So what I need to do is move the line down below this stroke or put something else in front of the mouth. So let's move this down here. Okay, so that looks cool. Let's move it down even further. Too far. Okay, it's kind of funny. I'm gonna make it a little cropped like that. Okay, cool. Okay, so now I have a mouth. Another thing to be careful of is, remember we talked about draw before. If I don't have like a fill here, and then I have no fill here, you would think that this rectangle would have a fill, like maybe it's default or something, but it actually doesn't. Because remember, the draw function keeps going over and over and over again. So the very first time this draws, like if I say no loop, then we do get that default white rectangle. But in the normal mode where we are looping, the draw is redrawing over and over again. So we're setting the no fill here, but then we go back to the beginning. So even though this rectangle is above the no fill, there has to be something that's setting that fill to overwrite it. So we can bring this fill back in, and there we go. We have our face back. So that's no stroke and no fill. Stroke weight we talked about. Hex values. We can also use one number for grayscale values. So like the default for the background is 220, I think. That's this kind of like light gray color. But if I did like 0, that would be black. So basically we're just assigning 0 to red, green, and blue. And that's how we get black. If we do 255, that's white. So it's 255 white, or 255 for green, red, and blue. So we're adding all those together, we get white. So you can do one number is grayscale. So we have like the 220. Two numbers is actually going to be grayscale plus alpha. I don't think we're going to be able to see this if I add it here because it's the background, so I'll add it somewhere else. So for example, I need another color to do this. Let's say I have some, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll make some like lenses for my weird eyes. So I'll copy these eyes. These are more like glasses now. And I'll put them down. Well, yeah, I'll just put a fill here. And so let's say the fill is light blue. Okay, so they block out the background. If I wanted to see through a little bit, I can add an alpha value or a transparency value. I can do that here actually by like playing with this value here. And it'll do it in CSS. So now it has a little bit of see-through. But I can do that with my regular numbers as well. So if I turn this into a number, 0.5 is close to 0. So it's actually, the range is going to be 255. So if I wanted this to be like half, I would say like 127. But I could do less than that. I could do like 100. So I have like a little bit of a see-through. So transparency, if you want to be able to see through, and you can, blend multiple colors together that way if you want to. Let's see. Okay, I think that's everything. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do more stuff with color when we do some interactive stuff, but those are basically how you can do your basic colors. You can look them up, you can edit them here, and then if you want to turn them into numbers, you can do that, but we don't really need to do that right now, so I wouldn't worry about that for now until we want to use some code to do more interesting stuff with the color. But yeah, I think it's a good overview for color, and also a little bit of a good start to the self-portrait. So just to quickly review, since we've only turned in one assignment so far, for this week we're going to be working on a self-portrait. As I mentioned before, you can keep just working with basic P5 shapes and colors. You don't have to draw something that looks like a person. You can draw whatever you want, but there should be some unique aspect that represents something about you. When you're ready to finish your self-portrait and turn it in, let's just review that process real quick. First, we want to do some documentation. So we want to capture an image from our self-portrait. You might think, oh, I can just send this link to somebody and they can just run the code and see it, but not everybody knows how to use this website. You might want to send the image to somebody on your phone. Part of what we're doing is creating media, even though we're using code to do it. So we want to save an image. And so to do that, easy thing to do is just say function mouse pressed and save the image. I'll save this as self-portrait1.jpg. And so now if I click on the canvas, it's going to save an image in my downloads folder. Okay, looks good. And now I'm just going to make a post on the Open Lab that includes the image, a link to my code, any other information that you want to talk about for your process. And this, I'll add this to our collection. So remember that if you're on the Open Lab page and you want to see something that I created in class, I'll put the links in the YouTube video description as well. But if you want to see something I made in class, just go to class examples and I'll add them here. So you can click on the sketch that I made here. You can duplicate it if you want to, save it in your profile and add modifications there. When you are ready to submit your self-portrait, go up here and click on the plus. And let's find our category. So this is assignment 2, self-portrait. Notice that assignment 3 is also using our self-portrait, so we're going to keep working with it next week to add a little bit to it. So say my self-portrait, and I'll say for my self-portrait, I drew myself with big eyes and a line for a mouth. Feel free to write whatever is might be relevant to your process here. I can then add the image. I can click on this guy and click on image, or I can drag and drop. If I drag and drop, I want to make sure when I drag my image to get this little blue box. If I don't see that blue box, it's not going to work. There's my image. It has this new alt text missing thing. We should add. Can we add that? How do we add the alt text? Oh, here it is. Alternative text. My self-portrait image. Okay. So that goes away. So then add a link to your code. So I'll just say link to my code. And then I'll go over here and make sure that if you haven't saved it yet, you're not going to see a unique URL here. So make sure you saved it, and then you can just copy this, or you can go to File, Share, and copy the edit one at the bottom. Just click on the text, and that'll copy. And then if we go back here, paste it in there. And then if you want to make it a clickable link, you can select the text. I keep hitting this dictionary button by mistake. Select the text. Okay, and then click on that link button. And so now that'll make it a link that we can click on. And if you want to make it open in a new tab, you can click on that and go to Advanced, click Save. And then we're going to preview this. Okay, looks good. And so I'm going to click Publish twice. and then we're going to submit this on Blackboard. So you'll only have to submit this link on Blackboard. You don't need to submit anything else. So copy this, go over to Blackboard, go to assignments, and find the correct assignment. You can view the rubric here if you want to make sure you did everything. If you added shape functions, color functions, comments, post on OpenLab, add an image, link to code. It's just like all the little steps that we talked about. Create a submission, paste in your, oh, won't let me paste. Okay, Command B. Paste in your OpenLab link and click submit. And that's it. We've got some time left in class. You guys can work on that. If you need help with anything or have any technical issues, let me know and I'll come take a look. Any questions?
Yeah. This is sort of like a question. Is there a way to like pinpoint like the exact coordinates that the mouse is on?
Yeah. We kind of looked at this previously, but let's go over it again. So I'm going to get out of the student preview. So this was a question that came up earlier in class, and we looked at this last week a little bit. So we can say, actually, we already have this function mouse pressed here. So let's comment out our save image for now. And what you can do is say console.log, and then mouse capital X, mouse capital Y. And so what this does is when you click on the canvas, it's going to print out the X and Y over here. So you can see the X and the Y. You could also add a label. So I could say like X, Y to make it a little easier to read. Although when you copy and paste, you might just want a comma there actually, because then you could copy. Because if I copy this, I'm going to be stuck with these useless X's and Y's. So I could put a comma right here. It just does a weird... Oh, no, because I added... Oh. That's weird. That's not what I want. Can I do this? Oh, no. Okay, so that doesn't really work. But anyway, you can get the X and Y values with that little function. And then you can just copy and paste in there. All right, I'm going to stop the